Hey folks, Nick here from Another BookTube channel. Today, continuing the Swamp Thing read-along with Swamp Thing number 63. We are nearing the end. This is the penultimate issue for Alan Moore's legendary run. And if you're not caught up, definitely go back and check out the previous episodes in this series, because Swamp Thing's been gone for a while, but he is back. He has figured out a way back home. And this is his triumphant return to Earth. I don't own this issue. I was as surprised as you are. I really thought that I did. I thought I saw this in my this cover in my short boxes, but I guess I don't. But nevertheless, the reproduction in the trade paperbacks isn't too bad. The colors are good. So this is not just Swamp Thing's return to Earth, but this is the return to horror. Once Swamp Thing went to space, the series became more sci-fi than anything. Still had a little bit of horror in there, kind of existential stuff, but definitely was a different feeling than those earlier books for the majority of Alan Moore's early run. And I read the introduction for this. This is volume 6 of Alan Moore's run. Introduction by Stephen Bissett, where he contextualized that during this time, Alan Moore kind of felt that he had done everything he could with the horror aspect, so he wanted to do something different, and he embraced the challenge of doing sci-fi that looked very different than sci-fi you'd expect. And at the same time, he was working on Watchmen. Like, he had a tremendous amount of pressure to be putting out Watchmen because the issues were delayed there. He was also working on Miracle Man. So he's got a lot of huge. He's working on arguably his 3 greatest comics projects at the exact same time. So the fact that he was able to maintain an intense amount of creativity in that period is unbelievably impressive. Like, even if the sci-fi stuff isn't my favorite, it's undeniably unlike anything else that I've seen before, and it's bold and creative and interesting. Enough preamble. Let's get into this issue 63. I really like the cover by Stephen Bissett. I love the use of color with just the red and orange background, the big spiny Swamp Thing at its center. And Swamp Thing is very aggressive in this issue because he has some revenge to get. And on our first page, we have him crashing back to Earth, disturbing some young lovers in the bushes, and he's off. He's off. He's looking because obviously he wants to get back to Abby, but we got to take care of some business first. We have to tie up some loose ends, which is the name of this issue, Loose Ends Reprise. Because if you remember, I think the first issue in Alan Moore's run was also called Loose Ends. Was it the second one or the first one? For some reason I can't remember. I think it may have been the first one. So we're back to tying up loose ends as Alan Moore gets ready to hand this off to Rick Veitch as the new primary writer on the series. Great spread page by Rick Veitch. Would love to see this original art because I'm curious what kind of penciling is being done here. Because the black in Swamp Thing's form isn't even really black; it's blue. So I'm wondering if there's actual blue line down, or if this is all just Tatiana Wood kind of doing it herself, piecing it together. Would be very curious to see that one. And I've talked in the past about these circle with the patterns in them in the previous issues. Also, that's Tatiana Wood doing a lot of work, and great seeing the dinosaur underground. So he's gone underground, and he is trying to locate some individuals, some folks. Written by Alan Moore, if that's not obvious. Art by Rick Veitch and Alfredo Alcala. And the story proper opens with Abby going to visit Matt Cable in the hospital. He's still in his coma, not likely to come out of it. And we get our first instance of a visual transition, which is something that Alan Moore uses a lot in his comics. We've seen it throughout this run. Gets used a lot here. We have her visiting Matt Cable laying prostrate under his sheet, and that cuts to Liz Tremaine at Abby's house, also under her sheet. Um, I think it's funny that his hospital like blanket and like the bed, it's so wrinkly. Like that's not realistic. Hospital sheets, like the beds are pretty smooth. The blankets, they don't give you big enough blankets to even wrinkle this much because they're so thin and flat. So I think they did that only so that it would more better mirror an actual bed sheet over there. But that's a creative liberty. You're not going to get too upset about that. We have what's his name, Chester, coming to visit Abby. He was going to check on her, but she's not home. Liz answers the door, and they have a nice interaction. And this loose end that's being tied up is Alan Moore making sure that Liz is getting her life back on track. She, was basically a battered woman, a tortured woman, a prisoner in her own home. So she's escaped, and Chester is helping her. Chester, without even realizing it, helps her get her groove back, or at least, take the first step. So, she was afraid to even take a bath because, that was in that issue where we get reintroduced to her. She was told by her boyfriend that, it's dangerous to have the water, go too high of a level. So she takes that first step. She takes a bath by herself in deeper water than she's comfortable with. Chester calls her beautiful, but she needs to mellow out a little bit. He's a very mellow guy. He's always doing the drugs, hallucinogenics. So that's a nice first step for her. And then we cut over to these people here. This guy, do I even remember his name? Gus. His name is Gus, and Gus was involved in the assassination of Swamp Thing back in issue 52. And now he is going to get his comeuppance. So he's brought a bundle of roses to his hookup here. And they started off pretty small in his hand, but they're getting bigger and bigger. And soon they become a little unwieldy, and they start to completely entwine him. The vines are reaching all the way around his back, and he's bowled over by it, and he falls over, and the roses end up choking the life out of him, and those thorns cut all the way through his body, and he's telling this woman to get on the phone and let Wicker know that he's back, because he knows this can only be Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing straight up kills this dude, which is awesome. Also, more of that visual repetition. The upper right panel here with the water, kind of semicircle. Get that same thing here with the IV tube, but also it's continuing from this panel here, so being repeated multiple times. While Abby is at the hospital, Chester shows up, and he bumps into Wallace, which is Wallace Monroe. His wife is Treasure. She is the one that got radiation poisoning from cuddling up with a Nuke Face in the Nuke Face Papers run. So she's been basically on life support since then, conscious but completely falling apart. So that's another loose end that's got to be tied up. Wallace comes to give her some flowers. This is his, he says it's his first time really visiting her because he hasn't been able to face up to it. But by the time he gets to her room, she finally she has passed just before he gets there, and her last words were to tell him good night. Really interesting that Alfredo Alcala is going absolutely insane with these marks all over the place. Like, look at the hospital walls, the doors. When we pull out, we see them here. It's a little excessive. I think the implication is just meant to be like kind of shadow. And he's done these before. Like these are like Frazetta marks and Bernie Wrightson marks. Usually, they're used kind of sparsely, or to show like the edge, like the side of a cliff or the side of something else. I've never seen them so brazenly just used, just repeatedly over and over again on some very like focal point images. I think it gets away from him a little bit. I think it's a little bit ugly being used in that way, like so excessively. We see it again here in the background there. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know the decision behind that. Another visual repetition of the covering of Treasure with the sheet, and then we have another guy who was involved in Swamp Thing's assassination. He's at home. He's this old man that's like bald, and he's like sleeping in his old room at his mom's house. And there is a peach blossom tree outside his open window, and he nods off and starts dreaming about being a little baby man on his mommy's lap. I think this guy might have some kind of Oedipal concerns. And then the dream starts to go wrong because the smell of peach blossoms is becoming overwhelming, and they start flooding into his room. His mom comes to bring him some hot cocoa, and when she opens the door, he is just completely drowned in peach blossoms. So that is another hit completed. Abby is still with Matt, and it's it's tough. She's lonely. She doesn't have anybody, and these visits to Matt aren't really helping her a lot. Chester finally meets up with her and asks her if she wants to be alone. She says, "Absolutely not. I do not want to be alone." She decides she wants to go to the swamps, just because it's a peaceful place for her. But before we go to that, we have another guy. We have another guy who was involved in the assassination of Swamp Thing, and what's going to happen to him now? Because we've got the precedent set. And he decides to take a stroll on his front lawn, which isn't even that big. It's a pretty small lawn. What do they say? It is 15 meters square, so not a huge lawn. And yet the grass starts to grow up to his knees, up to his neck, to, above his head. So now he's got to be pushing through them, and he's being met with walls of thorny vines. And as we pull out, we see that he is now trapped in a maniacal hedge maze, and that's his comeuppance. Abby and Chester head out to the swamp, and here Chester talks about how he bumped into Wallace, and he talks about how he gave away the last of the tuber that he had from Swamp Thing to Wallace to give to Treasure to try to make her pain a little less, to give her like a joyous experience, throughout her pain. And it seemed to work. He had gotten good feedback about that. He kind of regrets giving away the last of the tuber, but he also, he doesn't regret it too much because it was a nice thing to do. And Abby is also talking about how she feels like there's a lack of justice in the world because they took Swamp Thing away from her, and like nobody got in trouble for it. He was killed using military equipment, and yet nobody's taken responsibility for it. Nothing has been done about it. So there's just this lack of closure. Visual repetition of them looking into the pond, and we get these two guys who are monitoring Mr. Wicker. And Mr. Wicker is the guy who led the operation against Swamp Thing, and he is starting to hear the rumblings, and so he's ordered like all vegetation to be removed from the premises, replacing plants with plastic. He's getting that paranoia up. They bring him a sandwich to eat, and as they're talking, he notices that there is a tomato on the sandwich, and that he's already eaten half of it. He took the bite; it's in his stomach, and you could see it on his face that, he's boned. This guy is screwed. And sure enough, I love this just like moment by moment realization of what's happened to him. The camera going closer, and then when you get to that extreme close up, the leaves start coming out of his nose, coming out of his mouth, look at it. And he's panicking, freaking out, and then you get this explosion of red, and we have the reveal on this next page of him just completely petrified, treeified. This is the return to horror. This is absolutely horrific image. The fact that he maintains a kind of human appearance. This guy's covered in whatever of like the vegetable goo that was the byproduct of this. Just nasty stuff. But Swamp Thing got his man, took care of business. We're back in the swamps. This is a cool way to have two panels. Chester on one side talking a lot. Then we get the broken panel broken up. New panel of Abby, completely quiet, walking separate from him. And Chester was talking about how when he was in Gotham, when Swamp Thing had Gotham hostage, it was like the best day of his life because everybody was happy then. Like people were celebrating Swamp Thing. Like he put a little girl on his shoulders and he was like carrying her around, that everybody was cheering. And then he sees these, little tubers on the ground, and they look a little like the ones that he got from Swamp Thing. So he tries to start telling Abby, like, hey, I think I found something here. Like, these are familiar. And she's not, buying it. She just thinks he's looking for more drugs on the ground. And he says, no, look at these. These look just like the ones from him. And as they're talking, this dead tree starts to flower. And she has that moment of realization. He has the moment of realization. And we can see the grass at his feet starts to grow in a very specific way. And then it gets really long and it's growing up towards Abby's legs. And then it lifts her up off the ground. And we have the moment of catharsis, the beautiful reunion of Swamp Thing and Abby. She is overjoyed to see him. Love, we got Chester off the ground, jumping for joy, literally. That is the end of the issue. Next up, Return of the Good Gumbo. That's going to be Alan Moore's last issue. And while I don't want to ruin this beautiful moment, I couldn't help but notice while I read this one, the placement of this protruding one, little suspicious, don't you think? Maybe that was a little deliberate. I don't know. You tell me. But like, there's no other one that kind of looks like that, and like where it is, I don't know about that. You let me know what you think. But yeah, that is Swamp Thing number 63. We are almost at the end, folks. Next week we will be covering Alan Moore's final issue, issue 64. Let me know if there's anything that I missed in this issue that you think is worth talking about. And yeah, I'll see you again soon. Thank you very much for spending some time with me today. Now it's time to get back to reading.